Okay, good morning. Happy Hanukkah. We're continuing with Hilchos Mikvaos, Reish Bet. I just want to mention real quick from the previous Seif, previous Siman, the very end of the previous Siman, where we mentioned when one goes to the mikvah, there is a chumrah from the Arizal. It's brought down in several places, not to dry yourself off. It's his hiddur or chumrah, same thing, I think. Anyways, not to dry off, to leave that water, let it air dry, and just put your clothes on as is. Some are machmer, but that's obviously not the halacha. That's not necessary. And whatever we said as far as rinsing, the Ramah is against it, of course, if it's a necessary tevila. And fine. I just wanted to point that out. Okay. Siman Reish Bet, where we are, Seif Daled. Kol Yadot HaKelim Shenishberu. So if you have a handle for a kli, a kegon, hamagal ve'asakin, so yeah, any kind of a utensil, whether it's a knife, whatever it is, and it has a handle attached to it. So let's say it gets broken, all right? Part of it breaks off. So it depends if it's a chatzitzah or not. Let's see. Im mishamshim ein melachtan rishona. If it still is functional, the same way it was used before, okay, the handle's shorter, might be a little bit harder to use, a little less noach, but fine. But that is considered not ein chotzitzin. It's not a chatzitza. It's still part of the kli, and it's still functional, and you're planning to keep it there. So therefore, ein chotzitzin v'im lav. But if it's no longer functional, chotzitzin. So I'm assuming it's because it's gonna get cut off eventually. You're not gonna use it the way it is. So therefore, we look at it as if it's not gonna stay there, or it's not there. It's not supposed to be there, and you're gonna plan on removing it. And so therefore, it's blocking the area where you would cut it off. And since you're planning to remove it, it's in the way, and therefore it creates a chatzitzah. Okay, for specific cases, halacha l'maisa, I'll say ask your Rav if you're planning to keep it there or not planning to keep it there, but that seems to be the basic principle. Hey is a continuation. Let's read hey. Magal shenishbara yada mina safa v'lifnim ena chotzetzet mipnei shehi kebeit hastarim. Let's see if it breaks, and it breaks. You have a handle on the outside of a pot, and where it breaks, magal shenishbara yada, a sickle or saif, okay. So then nishbara yada mina safa. So if it breaks off all the way to the beginning of the metal or sickle part that you're using, vilifnim, and a little bit inwards, ena chotzetzet. It's not considered a chatzitza mipnei shehi kibeit hastarim, because whatever is there, whatever is left is going to get wet, and on the inside, anything that's there is considered beit hastarim. Mina safa ulachutz, but if part of the yad is still sticking out outside, like part of it is left, so then part of it is left sticking out. Ima shemeshet me'ein melachta ena chotzetzet. But if it's still sticking out, but you can use it, it's functional, just like we said in the previous seif, also ena chotzetzet, because it's still a yad and it's still functional, and therefore it's not a problem. V'im lav chotzetzet. But if it's no longer functional, I think I have to find a picture.
Where's the safa, the place where the handle meets?
I believe the safa is in the place where it meets. Yeah, I tried to look in the Mishnayos, but this is not a case in the Mishnah or in the Gemara, so it's a little sirga begemi ubemeshicha. You're saying part of it is hanging on?
If it's not there,
I hear it. Sirga begemi ubemeshicha. If it's covered up, if you attach it, maybe it's partially broken off. Aha. Okay. It's partially broken off, and therefore, right, so part of it is not going to get, Right. So if it's sticking outwards, broken off, so then you're going to remove what's ever left, and it's a Chatzitzah like Dalit. If it's broken off to inside the metal knife that's still usable, then, but it's attached, so then it's going to, even though you're going to cut it off, it's not a Chatzitzah because it's considered Beit Hastarim. We're going to see this halacha at the last seif, and you'll understand much better what I'm saying. Okay, so that would make a lot of sense, that Dalit is completely broken off, and Seif Hey, it's not completely broken off. And that also explains why, let's keep reading, Sirga begemiyu b'mashicha. In Hey, it says, not by Dalit, not you attach it, or you reattach it with some kind of gemi, or a string, or a rope. You do some kind of a temporary fix, so it still stays on and you can use it. That doesn't help. It's still a chatzitza. In other words, if it's sticking out, then it doesn't. And then we said it's a chatzitza, and the point is, it doesn't help to do this temporary fix. If it's a permanent fix, then sure it works. If it's a temporary fix, that doesn't help, because eventually that's the whole problem with Dalit in the first place, is because we're assuming you're going to come and cut it off and replace it because it's sticking out and it's not usable. It's not functional. So therefore it's chotzetzit. Davka b'sraf eina chotzetzit. But if you do some kind of a glue and it's permanent, so then it's no longer chotzetzit. Okay, very good. Let's read Vav, and when we get to the end of the seif, the siman, you'll better understand even what we just said. Kli kafa piv lamata, vichniso lamayim. Okay, now this is very relevant anytime we take dishes. I mean, in the future when we're more makbid on tum and tara, but nowadays when we do tevilas kelim, when we get dishes from a non-Jew. So we say a kli, you can't turn it upside down, right? If you have, let's say, a bottle, some kind of a, and you want to put it in. So we're saying, put it in from the below, the bottom, how it stands. You put that in first, and the opening is upward. But that's how we normally do it. Right? We mentioned, obviously, if it's an exact, 40 sa'al mikvah, so you have other issues of splashing out, whatever. But that's not for here. Normally, we never have that issue of an exact 40 sa'al mikvah. So generally speaking, you should, if you want to put it in upside down, right? The opening downwards, im piv tsar ktsat velo hafach piv lamala lo alta lo tvila lefi shelo yagiu amayim leshulav im machniso kulo afilu im machniso kulo lamayim. So he says like this: it's very important to put it where the opening is facing upward. This way, when you put it in all the way, obviously no water is going to go inside the kli until you put it all the way in. Then the water is going to quickly fill up, and the entire inside will be filled with water, because you need the entire surface to be covered up with water. Right? Except for, the only exception is Beit Hastarim. It only has to be able to get water. But this is not called Beit Hastarim. The entire kli needs to be filled up with water. But if you do it upside down, the assumption is, generally speaking, it's not going to be completely filled with water. You're going to end up with air bubbles at the very least. Or it could be a big pocket, either a small pocket or a big pocket of air. And therefore, we assume the mikvah did not work, and it's going to stay tameh. Haga. Mutter lidbo kli bit. Okay, so we explain that. And if you're going to put it in upside down, then when it's in the water, obviously just flip it before you take it out. Pretty simple. Haga.
The box said, even if it has a wide mouth, it's not going to work.
You're right. The Shach points out, even if it has a very wide opening, it's still a problem. Like if you're going to put a pitcher, don't put a pitcher upside down unless you make sure when it's inside the water, you flip it so that the water goes in there. Okay. Let's keep reading Haga. Mutter litbol kli betoch kli im yesh befi hachitzon kishvoferet hanod. Now, what if you want to put a kli inside a kli? You want to put a dish inside a bowl. You want to put a dish inside a bottle. Right? You want to put a fork or a knife inside a bottle. One of the reasons why you might do that is it's harder to lose it. If you let go, it's less likely for it to fall out and get lost or slip out of your fingers. Whatever the case is, a kli inside a kli, so it depends. He says, if if the opening of the kli is kishvoferet hanod, right, the opening of the bottle or the bowl, whatever is in there, if it would be more than let's just say 4 or 5 centimeters, kishvoferet hanod, no problem. Here, I'll keep reading and then we'll come back. V'zeher shekli apnimi yehi rafui betoch kli achitzon. And then, but make sure though, the inner kli is loose inside so that it can get water all around it. But the inner kli still needs to have water all the way around it. Now, I don't want to get too technical. The Shach just points out the only time it's a problem over here is if the outer kli is tahor. Or if you're going for mikvahs tevilas kalim, the outer kli really it already was toveld, or you're just putting it there as a chumrah. Maybe it doesn't need to be toveld. If you're using something like, I don't know about deraisa derabanan, that's al tzarachiyun, but if one is and one isn't, right? But anyways, the Shach just points out if the outer kli is tameh, then it's for sure. Then it's not a problem, even if it's not kishvel feratanod, it won't be a problem. Okay, because one is being. We're saying because one is becoming tameh. If the outer one is becoming tahor, agav the outer kli, the inner kli is going to become tahor with it. We don't have the same. We don't have to worry about kishvel feratanod. But let's keep reading. Let's go on. V'izar shekli apnimi yehi rafui b'toch kli. Lachein lo yitchov sakinim toch dili. Vit bilem. He just points out, I don't think we do this anyway, if you're going to put a basket in there or some kind of a plastic container and you want to put your knife in there, right? We mentioned you want to have holes in there and then you have no issues, right? As long as you have enough holes that add up to sheferet hanod, you're not going to have an issue. So all of or a basket that has holes and all the water just drains right out. So whenever you go to a mikvah and they have those little crates or whatever openings, a dish with openings, so that you can put multiple utensils at the same time, that's not a problem. Each hole you can combine each hole biyachad. You don't have to worry about each hole by itself doesn't have to be kishvoferet tanod. We learned that before. Anyways, he's just telling you, don't take a knife and stab it into the walls of your basket, because then it's going to be. And you do that when it's before it gets wet, because then the knife is going to be touching tightly against the walls of your basket that's stabbed, and therefore that's going to be a chatzitzah. So lo kilo ta'ale tevila berosham, because at the head of it where you stabbed it into your basket, the mikveh is not going to work. V'chein ima kliya panimi hu kaved. He also tells you, if you're going to put something inside a kli, and you do it outside when everything is dry, and it's very heavy. If it would be very heavy, then the pressure is not normal, not regular resting pressure. It's a very heavy kli. It's going to push down on the kli, on the bucket, or whatever you're putting it into, and there it's going to be tightly pressed against it when it was dry, and then it's going to be a chatzitzah. Now, the Shach just says normally it's never really going to be an issue because they're not heavy enough unless you fill up the inside of the kli that it'll make enough pressure. But anyways, then he goes on to say, but let's say you want to put in a huge amount, lots of cutlery at the same time in a basket. So I don't have an exact amount to say, and obviously there may be different opinions on the matter, but bottom line, if you're going to put a lot of utensils in a basket, let's say, right, you have these baskets or crates, so you can tovel, 20 forks and knives at the same time, or spoons. So the idea is over here, if you're going to put one beside another, side by side, all of them. So the Shach says, for sure, that's no problem. That's going to be perfect. Even if there's a little bit of touching and overlapping, when you put it in the water, it's going to jiggle a little bit and they're all going to get wet. If you're going to start piling, I don't know, let's just say 30 forks, metal forks and knives all at the same time while it's dry, and then you lower it into the mikvah, that might be a problem if you don't shake it and move them all. Then that could be a real problem, because then that might be a chatzitzah, one resting on the other. So I would say don't put so many at the same time. And when you do, like, don't pile them on top of each other. And then if you, whatever, maybe if it's one layer, it depends what the mitzias. But if you're going to have at least one piled on the other, then you better jiggle it or move them around. Hold it with one hand, and then with the other hand, move them all around, so that at least for 1 second, their water is going to get through. Again, I don't know what's the maximum that's reasonable, but better just mainly just lay them out side by side. And again, it's okay if there's a little bit of overlapping, but if there's a lot of overlapping, then that's when it could become a real question. Or you're going to have to make sure you do a good shake so that they all get water. Fine. Fine. Let's do Zayin. Kli shitzar mikan umikan v'rachav be'emtza. If you have a kli that has a big, I don't know, in Hebrew they call it a beten. I don't know, we don't really say a belly, a stomach in America for a bottle, but you have like a bottle where it gets wide in the middle, but at the very bottom and at the very top, it's very narrow. So he says, if I'm not exactly sure, but bottom line, you just have to get the water out. You have to get the air out and the water in. So whatever the case might be, you might have to make sure the kli, you put it sideways, and then that'll work. Or move it around. I don't know. Spin it around 360, whatever you need to do, just to make sure that any shape you have. Now, I don't see it over here, but there's an interesting case in the Mishnah. I think it's in Perek Yud, where it has a case where the lip of the kli goes inward. And I don't know how to explain that, but you have like a regular, so you take a regular pitcher and the top lip is bent over inward. So you have this inside lip, and it just says that the water can never get there if you don't actually drill a little hole to the side of that lip so that the air bubbles get out.
Probably like a soup tureen.
A soup tureen?
That goes on the inside.
Right. So if you have a rim that's folded inward, ask a shaila. That I just want to point that out. Chet, let's just finish here. Kol kalisha piftzar yoter mishuferet hanod. Anytime the opening of the bottle is less, that's what it means. It means less than kishvoferet hanod. Tzarich lehashoto b'mayim ad shitmalei o yimlenu kodem shechnisenu lemikvah. Make sure that when you put it in the mikvah, you leave it there long enough for water to get in, because it's so narrow, it takes time. It's not immediate. Or fill it up with mayim she'uvim outside the mikvah and then put it in. And when you put it in, there'll be a chibur. What's interesting is the shach, we're not going to get into it, but just as a quick little rule to help you understand, there's a principle of you need to make, in order to make a chibur of two separate bodies of water, then you need to have kishvoferet hanod. But here, if you mentioned, right, you filled it up with water and then you put it in and it's just going to touch with a small little opening, well, that's okay, because for the kli itself, you don't need kishvoferet hanod. You just need a mashahu of water all the way around it and to connect to it, and that's fine. We even had a case of kichuta se'ara. But if you're connecting, if it's the same body, the same container, the same bore, the same mikvah, we learned kichuta se'ara is enough. So too, the kli itself, in this bore, a kichuta se'ara of water is enough. The only time you need kishvoferet hanod is if you're connecting completely two separate bodies of water. Now, generally speaking, the Shulchan Aruch just says if it's kishvoferet hanod, you have to make sure it fills up with water. You have to give it enough time. The Shach just points out, it depends on the metzias. Sometimes even kishvoferet hanod takes time, and you also have to make sure it takes time to fill it up on all sides. Okay, Last seif. Um, Now, this is important. It goes back to what we said before. Yado takelim shehem aruchot ve'ati lekotzitzan. Let's say you have a long handle to a kli, and it works just fine. There's no problem, and it's not broken. It's longer than you need. You're having in mind to trim it. It's a little bit annoying. It's too long, and you don't need it that long. It doesn't fit in your cabinet. I don't know. Whatever the reason is, you want to shorten it. It gets in the way. But right now, it's longer, but it works, and there's no problems. Function. So then, but in the future, you're planning to cut it off. Matbil ad mikom she'ati lakotz vidayo. Since you know you're going to shorten it, make a mark, a mental mark, or whatever it is, where you're, or I don't care, you can write on it. You can make a mark where you're going to cut it off, and then you only have to, you need to dip. You only have to dip it into the mikvah up until that mark, or up until where you're going to cut it off. The entire length of the handle does not have to be in the mikvah, because you're planning to cut it off at a certain point. That point that you're going to cut off, that the rest of the handle, the extra whatever, you don't need, that doesn't have to get wet, doesn't have to go in the mikvah. It only has to be until there. And we call that connection Beit HaStarim. And because, right, that connection is Beit HaStarim, and Beit HaStarim never needs to get wet. It only has to be able to get wet, but doesn't have to actually get wet. Like, there can't be a separate Chatzitzah problem. And this, I'll just point, so we're done. This will help you understand better with Seif Hey. But what I want to just also point out, this halacha is a source, or the principle is the same source. There is an opinion, we're not going to get into it now all over again, but electrical appliances. Do you have to dip every electric appliance, right? You have an electric appliance, like a hot water urn, and you plug it into the wall. Does the entire thing, does that kli have to go to the mikvah? Does the entire kli have to go to the mikvah? So I'm not going to get into it, except I want to just point out this halacha, this principle is the source for the opinion, and I believe it's Rav Moshe. I saw it, but I don't want to say 100%. I didn't look it up recently. I think he's the one who writes that you only have to dip the electric urn up until the bottom of where it fills up water, and not the extra few inches or centimeters below where the electric element is. You only have to, you turn it upside down basically, but you have to make sure it obviously gets filled up with water to the top. You dip it until that point, just beyond, so that it's up to where but that electric part, because it's like two kalim, he considers it like two kalim, and two separate kalim that are attached. That you're not coming to cut it off later, but it's the same idea. And so that part which is covered up is called Beit HaStarim, and you only have to get water up to that point from the outside, but you don't have to get the electric element half filled with water.